Welcome back to the Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today we're going to talk about the Talking Hedge, why I started it, what it's all about, and what we're doing. Currently, we're going to be diving into some laws about overturning the Class C felony in Washington State for marijuana lounges. It is currently a felony to own and operate a cannabis lounge. And so I'm working on overturning that law. We talk about that towards the end. Talk about finance and cannabis and everything in between. So sit back, relax, kick up your feet, and stay tuned. Talking Hedge is a cannabis business podcast, so we look at everything through the lens of finance. So we just did a bud tenders podcast at the Seattle World Trade Center. We had Brian Yeager of Lemon Haze. We had a couple bud tenders. We had members of the media with Brightfield Group, as well as an HR person from work. And we talked about the business of bud tenders. Bud tenders are an integral part of the industry. They're the difference between bankruptcy and billions. And so when you're talking about an individual who only makes $15 an hour, it doesn't make business sense. And so we dive into topics as it pertains to the cannabis industry and try to come up with a baseline of what it is, why it's important and relevant, and the future of that segment or topic in the eventuality that it becomes globally legal like any other commodity. And bud tenders are a bottleneck with as many as 2,000 products on the shelf. They're the ones describing and differentiating products for the end consumer. And so that's just one example of taking a normal position and really diving in granular, looking at data and having a panel discussion on the importance of that topic, this being bud tenders. So we've driven into a cannabis lab, having a lawyer, accountant, and banker. We've had automation. And so what's going to happen with scaling and financing when banking becomes legal and you're able to lease equipment? So in that eventuality, you're going to have multi-state operators and scaling abilities and international expansion. We've talked about terpenes, which really isn't being talked about from the business standpoint. And yet LaCroix is going through a huge lawsuit right now, and their sales are plummeting as a result of having, quote, unnatural terpenes. And so each segment within the industry has an opportunity to become normalized, a commodity, global product, global brands. And so the Talking Hedge just dissects each of these topics. The Talking Hedge is on YouTube, so it's a video, but most of the platforms are audio. And I chose the podcast because I felt compelled. I didn't want to do a podcast, to be quite honest with you. It's a lot of work, and I'm busy as a consultant. I work with Canadian and California companies and everywhere in between. I'm trying to relocate to Puerto Rico to take advantages of all the amazing business opportunities down there. And so a podcast was something that I didn't want to take on, but I felt compelled to. Once I visited Puerto Rico last year, there was information I got while I was down there that can help every single business in the industry not only thrive, but survive. And so if businesses aren't relocating or at least having an entity in Puerto Rico, it's my opinion they probably won't be around, especially CBD companies. Those individuals that are CBD manufacturers who don't work or utilize Puerto Rico will not be around 5 years from now. And I felt compelled to tell people that. So I reached out to individuals that were hosting meetings. There was the Intercontinental Cannabis Business Exchange. I reached out to them and I was able to speak at their meeting. There was another podcast called Baked and Awake, and I wanted to do a segment, but the feedback I got was that it's just too niche. Cannabis business podcast is not something that everybody wanted to add. And so I looked around, I didn't see that there was a lot of options out there for people that have, my experience in banking and finance, international business and operations, coupled with half a decade in the cannabis industry. And so again, just feeling compelled to get that information out, really kind of forced me to start a podcast. And it really just started with Puerto Rico and the advantages of doing business. And then joint rolling machines and automation that I've been working on for 5 years. I really wanted to put out some videos on, helping people automate. Yeah, there's a company here locally in Seattle that has 18 individuals on making pre-rolls, and that's crazy to me. We haven't had anybody in this country making hand-rolled cigars for 100 years, and yet we're doing that with cannabis. So automation and business and Puerto Rico and international opportunities all needed a home, and the Talking Hedge has been that place to kind of present cannabis business topics. And it's been working out really, really well. We've had feedback from one of the top 4 publicly traded companies in Canada wanting us to come up there because of the competition, getting our boots on the ground and giving them feedback and data in real time as it pertains to their business and why consumers are buying the product. And that's one thing that you have to infer from the data. It's not really available on consumer purchasing decisions that the Talking Hedge gets done. Dan Kimmis is our CBD correspondent. He goes out and he'll just stand in front of a store for a few hours, or the both of us have gone out to 20 stores in a day. It's an annual thing, 20 stores on 420. We ask several questions to the people at the door, several questions to each bud tender. And by the time we're done, we have 40 to 60 answers, and we aggregate that small data set and make a business report out of it. And that's been essential to the industry that people don't have, and has created a really nice niche for the Talking Hedge. And really, it's just about dissecting companies and opportunities, something that's new, neat, and niche. It needed to happen. It was something I didn't want to do, but felt compelled to. Just like pre-rolls, a podcast is all about convenience. It's easy to grab and go on your phone or your favorite podcast platform, and it's just simple to digest. I try to keep things really straightforward and simple. I keep them very transparent. I keep all the language relatively easy to understand. And so the format is straightforward. We talk about the news, and it's very relevant and easy to digest. And I think just the transparency and having fun doing it, making it relevant to me and the people I know is easier to absorb. For me, it's about 90% finance, and that's all I listen to. Is a majority is finance stuff. And so I wanted to produce a podcast that was for people like me that wanted a business aspect of cannabis. It's not for speculators, but it's for people who already have a decent understanding of the industry. It's not for beginners. It's for individuals who want to know where to go, what to do. And yeah, there's a lot of people in traffic. And so it makes sense to provide something for people to listen to who aren't interested in terrestrial radio any longer, who want to educate themselves and take advantage of long commutes. And that's what I do. And so I know that I'm not the only one out there. And I made a podcast for people like me who want to learn more about the cannabis business opportunity. When I started it, I didn't know what I was doing. And it's very clear in the beginning that I don't have the right microphone. And so the Kaizen is a Japanese philosophy of constant improvement for the better. And so the Talking Hedge podcast lives by that Japanese philosophy of Kaizen and is trying to constantly improve itself and get better every single time. That's a caveat, though, because I'm telling you that my favorite ones are the very beginning because of the content, not because of the production quality, but the cannabis lab, the lawyer, accountant, and banker I found to be really informative. We also had the executive director of the World Trade Center to talk about the normal implications and how cannabis as a commodity is going to become just like anything else. And so when you have people, subject matter experts like a lawyer and an accountant and a banker, and then the World Trade Center executive director, I found that the conversation was very interested. As the CBD laws with the Farm Bill come into play and places like Idaho confiscating hemp, the conversations just naturally, organically kind of form and flow from, just this basic understanding of what cannabis is to this international commodity. And it all happens in an hour and a half. So that's one of my favorite episodes. And then maybe another one where the audio quality is terrible, but content is worth listening to is the automation. So the automating and scaling is definitely something I'm interested in and been focusing on. Those episodes really kind of bring you to the future, I think, of what cannabis could be, whereas other ones are about the present. We're looking currently at bud tenders, we're looking currently at terpenes, whereas the cannabis lab and the automation panel are really looking at the future. And I think the content that we got is solid. What they say is worth listening to, and I really think that we're already starting to see that transition uh, turn into reality. Those predictions are already starting to come true. We did an episode today on 6 predictions that are coming true. I mean, the most obvious one is that the CBD market's going to explode, but I think the one that I've been saying that's been somewhat controversial, that people don't necessarily see yet, is that companies are going to consolidate and have even more competition in the cannabis market. I think the next wave, and what the Talking Hedge podcast has been saying now for 6 to 9 months, is that people have first mover advantages, and those that don't take that advantage and move on are going to be left behind. There's an opportunity now to, quote, sell out and use that money for your next idea. I don't want to say, unless you're a one-trick pony, you can try and create a legacy, but I'm not sure you want to be Larry's Handy Mart in a world of 7-Elevens. So as companies consolidate and Canadian capital continues to come in and aggregate all of these companies, you can sell out and move on to your next idea and use that capital to have a snowball effect. Consolidation will turn into capitulation, which is forced mergers. Capitulation is when people are going to have to come together that don't necessarily want to, as a way to still stay relevant. So a forced merger and acquisition will come shortly after this next wave of consolidation, which will follow forced consolidation or capitulation. And we're seeing that in Washington State already, where people are giving away their license in exchange for a 6% royalty because they know that they can't do anything. They're not able to produce cannabis at a well enough quality or price point to be competitive. And so they're literally just essentially walking away with only 6% royalties. That's more than they're probably making anyways. But that, in my opinion, is a forced capitulation. It's just wiping your hands and saying, I'm done. So consolidation is the next wave. We saw with the micro or macro beers, everyone wanted something that actually had flavor. And recently with Canopy Growth firing their CEO, Bruce was let go because he was great at putting deals together, but those deals didn't generate revenue. So Constellation Brands, owner of Corona, isn't going to just dump $4 billion and not get the return on investment. When Starbucks expanded drastically, put their stores next to mom and pops, and then dropped the price of coffee and then forced all of those mom and pops out. And like you mentioned, there's going to be another, bloom of companies. With alcohol, we saw microbreweries. Now you go to the store, you see 20 to 40, 22-ounce cans or bottles, and they're everywhere. In cannabis, or in coffee, that niche became bikini baristas. So in order to compete with Starbucks, you had, women scantily clad serving coffee. And that's this new wave, and that'll probably consolidate. I've already seen individual stands be bought by one brand. And so that's interesting. But with cannabis, I think you're going to have a macro and a micro level too. You're going to have these huge farms that are producing mid-grade 16% outdoor Blue Dream. And then you're going to have tier 1 producer processors creating more cultivars for a discerning taste. These high-end individuals that actually want terpenes specific to a euphoric, energetic, uplifting effect, for example, is going to be something that is a small farm and available just like a microbrew or a high-end coffee barista place. It's going to be that next wave that comes after the micro, some big conglomerates that come out and buy everybody up. But again, the next wave will just be these smaller producers and processors that produce strains and quality that are worth buying. And in Canada right now, you're seeing returns on products that people don't want. Uh, Quebec is returning product customers. 43% of Canadians are buying black market. That's not because of inconvenience. That's because there's concentrate that's black. That's because there's mold on the flower. That's because people don't want to buy it. They'll take the extra tax and pay more for convenience. We've seen that in every single market. But the anomaly in Canada is that there's an extremely high amount of bad product, low quality, coupled with a high price. And that's not good either. So you're already starting to see CEOs get fired and using a lot of that capital come into the US, buy hemp products that are 280E exempt. And then eventually we're going to see that property, plant, and equipment become used for THC. So they're in a good position to gobble up some of these companies. But I think it'll be a lot of the people in the US and California specific that has a GDP that's fifth in the world that's going to produce a lot of the high-end cannabis quality from that tier one level that people actually want to consume. My favorite thing about the cannabis industry is the potential. There's a lot of avenues. There's a lot of untouched markets. There's a lot of products that you can develop incorporating either CBD or THC for an active cannabis lifestyle. And so whether it's recreation or medical, I love the potential. I love the opportunities that it could present with technology as well as finished goods and services. When I was working in finance, I was managing a $650 million fund. So I saw that it was going to be legalized eventually. You can't just open up a genie with hundreds of millions of dollars, eventually billions and then trillions, and try to put that genie back in the bottle. So I knew it was legit. I left my job. I was in it full time. That's 5 years ago. The industry's been slow. There's not many people making money. I've had to pivot to stay relevant several times. It's been challenging, but I enjoy it. I wouldn't go back to corporate America. I'm in this thing to the end because of all of the opportunities. You can transition from catering to event planning to wholesale brokering to consulting, and do all of that in 5 years and still stay relevant. There's not many other industries you can do that. Being so new, there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of cash coming in. And so my background's international business and finance. I can't be in a better position than I am right now. And there's a lot of other people who have a subject matter expertise that can be in the same position. And so it's very exciting to offer opportunities in finance now where it's finally becoming available to Americans outside of Canada. And that's exciting. I love being in the cannabis space because of the new things. Every time I look around, there's something that's new, neat, and niche that's coming out that can help people, whether it's technology or, maybe a new phenotype that's going to help somebody. There's CBG that's coming out wholesale now that I'm seeing in bulk. That's really interesting. And so every day I wake up is a fascinating new story to relay on the Talking Hedge and to try and help my clients, whether it's getting that CBG or getting that vertically integrated opportunity out of Canada. I'm fulfilled every day because there's needs and wants in the industry that need to be met. And my background and experience is a conduit for that. And I'm very charged by it. Yeah, it's funny. I just had somebody ask me, why I'm doing this. And really it's just about like Puerto Rico, right? I mean, I said it before, but I didn't want to do it, but I just kind of felt compelled to. So this guy was like, well, why are you telling me about Puerto Rico? What do you get out of this? And I'm like, I don't get anything, man, but you need to do it in order to stay alive and stay relevant. And if you find that what I have is valuable and worth listening to, then, ask me to be on your board of advisory. And so that really that's been working really well. So whether it's director of finance or contract CFO, mergers and acquisitions analyst, I just keep talking about what I know and it adds value and people want to bring me on board. is when you just start talking and you create value and benefit and what you have experienced, and you're able to articulate that to help other people save 19 to 24% margins. That's insane when people are only used to 3 to 5%. And that's why people will survive in this industry, is because people like us have that experience and able to have a podcast or publication to inform people and help them stay relevant and help them pivot to live another day. I mean, I think one of the coolest things that differentiates me from maybe some other podcast is hosting it at the World Trade Center once a month. It's the largest business-to-business networking group in the world, with 300 offices in 99 countries, providing e-commerce opportunities with the World Trade Center export store that's powered by Alibaba, translated into 18 languages, and providing companies an opportunity to list their products into hard-to-reach spots like Southeast Asia, including China. And there's a lot of investors and opportunities that are associated with the World Trade Center that I'm able to take advantage of. And another thing is, when selling internationally, a lot of people don't understand how to do that. So with the World Trade Center providing international letters of credit and bank guarantees, that's peace of mind for individuals to translate and sell internationally, where they're not even used to being able to sell out of state. So I think a very professional organization like the World Trade Center is an advantage for people. There's World Trade Centers all over the United States, obviously headquarters being in New York. The loan service center for the Pacific Northwest is in Tacoma, but there's another World Trade Center in Seattle that we're also at. And so that's giving our podcast panelists and interviewees an opportunity to have a global audience. Oregon bill for consumption lounges includes tourism as well as special use venue licenses. So we took a bus down there. There was 7 or 8 of us on the committee, all rolled down there, had a great meeting for 3-4 hours on the way down, held a 30-minute meeting, hung out for a little bit, took a look around the Northwest Cannabis Club, and then immediately drove right back. Had a really good, long discussion on how to create the bill for a marijuana lounge. The biggest headwinds facing, quote, marijuana lounges in Washington State is going to be impaired driving. I think that there's a lot of information around, and misinformation, if you will, around impaired driving as it pertains to cannabis cafes. There's been a lot of data that we've seen from every state that's gone legal that hasn't shown impaired driving yet, and that there's still a concern. So we need to address that concern. Outside of that, there's 3 components that we need to make sure are included in this bill in order to gain the support that we need from all of the community, which includes small business, a social equity program for minorities, as well as medical. So if we can show the Liquor and Cannabis Board, state legislators, the community with the town hall, and show them that there's a benefit for medical, a benefit for small business, and a benefit for minorities with the social equity program, that's going to really pave the way and almost supersede the concerns for impaired driving. The Cannabis Alliance, for example, is a group of business owners that have lobbyist support. I'm a chair committee for the marijuana lounge to overturn the Class C felony that doesn't allow for owning and operating a consumption lounge. And so that the Cannabis Alliance is heavily involved in getting this Class C felony overturned while implementing a bill to allow that. And if we can work around that and work directly with the regulatory authorities, being the Liquor and Cannabis Board, to try and remove that felony, as well as implement laws that help small business, medical, and minorities, we'll get it passed. Tourism, I think, is a big deal, but we also have other individuals that don't have the ability, people who live in apartments or landlords that don't allow smoking. I had a friend who died of multiple sclerosis, which drove me into the cannabis industry from my cushy job at worked for a stockbroker in the finance industry managing a $650 million fund. I left that job because I wanted to start the Seattle Super Chronic Cafe. I was compelled to help my friend who was in an adult care facility have a place to consume. It's a federally subsidized spot. They won't allow you to vape or smoke or anything on the property. And yet he lives within 1,000 feet of a high school. So he's really in a predicament. So there needs to be a spot for people to go and consume in a safe place for all people, whether they're in an adult care facility or an apartment, tourism or otherwise. We just met yesterday in Oregon to discuss their bill. That was the 6th bill. So we meet every other week. That's been 12 weeks that we've been meeting. So we have covered the Las Vegas bill, which was interesting because they allowed alcohol, although that has been shelved for at least 2 years now. So Las Vegas won't have a consumption lounge. Alaska was the first state as a state to try and get that bill passed. So we've covered Alaska, Colorado, New Jersey, California, including West Hollywood and San Francisco's safe injection sites, just for the literature on overdosing and educational requirements. So we've covered a lot of these states. We're going to cover Illinois and Massachusetts before diving into writing our own bill. So this is going to be a 9-month project that we're focusing on, only leaving us 60 days to write the bill, to give it to our Senate sponsors and submit that bill on our behalf. But we'll get that done by the end of the year, and I'm confident it'll be passed next year. I think cannabis cafes are, a window into the soul of the cannabis community. And once people are able to see through that window and see that it's normalized, that it's professionalized, that it's no different than a restaurant or bar, and that the patrons are actually going to behave better than what the alcohol industry is used to, it's going to open up a lot of opportunities, a lot of investment. A lot of smaller towns are going to need that tourism and capital. And I think once people are able to see it, then that's when a lot of innovation is going to come in. We haven't seen a lot of innovation in the cannabis industry for 4 or 5 years. Remember the Toker Poker came out in 2015, and that was fun. But we haven't really seen a lot of stuff, and it's because of a lack of capital. And Washington has probably been the hardest hit because of the restrictions on out-of-state capital, as well as not being vertically integrated, having investors that can only be a producer, processor, or a retailer, but not all three, really limits the amount of investment we're going to see in Washington. We've got a lot of smart people here, a lot of highly educated individuals, a lot of tech-savvy individuals, and yet hardly any capital relative to other states that have gone legal after us.
And with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is the Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.